Hi fam, and welcome to the last video of 2020. Can you imagine? This is nuts. But this is also the last video of my anticipated reads thing because I decided to in my end of the year series, which is still ongoing in 2021 by the way, so like there's more content, but I decided to talk about a lot of my anticipated reads of 2021, and I divided them into 4 videos because I have a lot of books which I thought were really interesting, and instead of whittling them down to like a small number, I just wanted to share like all of the books with you that I thought were really cool. I may not read all of them, but like you might find something that is interesting and like read it, and that's cool. I am just the curator here. But anyway, in this video I am want to talk to you about some of the non-fiction reads from the Indian publishing sphere, and there are 17 books that I want to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about them either very briefly or like fully read out what is written, because I just think that there are very interesting topics in this, which include memoirs, political based things, social causes, and just like very interesting topics. So let us just dive in. If there is, however, any book that you think that I am missing out on, please do comment down below and let me know. I did get like a list of books from amazing publishers and also through my own research, and these are just the books that I think personally are interesting to me, so it applies to my personal eclectic kind of taste. But yeah, that is that. And now let us begin actually. So the first book, I'm just gonna get this like out there and say the first book is Unfinished by Priyanka Chopra Jonas, and I'm gonna read this book, guys. Like, Priyanka Chopra is a really famous Bollywood actress who's now like moved to the US, married to Nick Jonas, and is living a cool life. But she also had a cool life before that, where she was, her father was in the army, if I'm not mistaken, or part of the armed forces. She lived in the States and did her high school there. She won the Miss World pageant, and then became an actress. And like, I really liked her journey within as well, because in the beginning she wasn't such a great actress, but now I think that she's like, some of her roles I have actually really liked her performances. So I'm intrigued. I just want to know about her life because I'm nosy like that, and she's gonna write it. So, or whoever ghosted it, whatever. But I still want to read it. And another memoir by a actress is A Country Called Childhood by Deepthi Naval. Deepthi Naval, of course, is not a actress of my generation, but like of my mom's generation. But of course, she is really famous, and you would have definitely seen her face around, even if you don't really like follow movies, etc. And I just think that she seems like a really interesting character, and I would like to know more about her. She just has like this poise about her, so I just want to I want to read her memoir. And now we move on to a person who is kind of part of, I mean, she's part of the film fraternity, but she is also kind of part of the bookish community, and I will tell you why. Because it is a book called A Place in My Heart by Anupama Chopra. And Anupama Chopra is essentially comes from like a filmy family where her mother was a scriptwriter of some really famous movies. She is then, of course, married to Vidhu Vinod Chopra, who is a huge director and producer in India. Her sister Tanuja Chandra is also another director who in the Indian film fraternity. And of course, Vikram Chandra is her brother. Vikram Chandra wrote Sacred Games and a bunch of other books. But yeah, that's why the bookish connection. And then her daughter is also an author. So anyway, I think she's a cool person. Like I've met her once, and she just seems really cool. She also is a founder of MAMI, which is the Mumbai Association of Movies Internet. I don't know what the full form of MAMI is. I'll put it here. But yeah, it's like a film festival which she curates, and I think that is really cool. And she's just a cool person. So I want to read her book. The fourth book, which is also a memoir, I'm just gonna get all the memoirs out there, all right, is Kobat Gandhi's memoir. And if you don't know who Kobat Gandhi is, he's essentially like a Marxist person who is an activist, and he was put into jail many times. But however, recently he was put into jail under the UAPA Act, and along with a lot of other political prisoners. He is now, however, out of jail on bail, if I'm not mistaken. But he is writing a book, and I am just going to read out what it says. It says activist and Marxist thinker Kobat Gandhi will come out with his memoir next year, which is in 2021, chronicling his life as a student in London to his return in India and introduction to the Dalit Panthers and radical politics. In this memoir, which is published by Roli Books, he will talk about his life working for Dalits, the poor, his and his wife's involvement with the Naxalites, and his ongoing legal battles. And yeah, I think I just find it really interesting. I had like heard of him when he was in the news, when he was arrested and stuff like that. And he is one of the few people who are out from the UAPA Act, which is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is anyway, I just look forward to reading what he has to say. The next book that is doesn't have a name yet, but it is by K.K. Shailaja, who was the health minister and still is the health minister of Kerala. And the Kerala, the way that they worked during the corona pandemic, and how they kind of shut it down and made sure that things and precautions were taken into play was really like looked as like a good case practice by many people, including the UN and WHO, and she was lauded by all of these organizations. And I just think that it is interesting that she's going to be writing a book which talks about how she handled the pandemic, and in also she will take us through the Kerala model and explain why the state has such a great development models for its citizens. I do think that Kerala in general is quite a interesting state in terms of the way that they work. Their literacy rates, for example, are the highest in our country. And yeah, I just think that it is going to be an interesting book to kind of read and understand as well. Moving on to something much lighter, is a book called I Came Upon a Lighthouse by Shantanu Naidu. And Shantanu Naidu is essentially this young boy, like he's still in his 20s, and his mentor is Ratan Tata. So essentially what happened was that he is a person who really cares for like stray dogs and animals and stuff like that, and he decided to write to Ratan Tata to ask him to maybe even like mentor him, because Ratan Tata too is very fond of strays and animals, and like tries to take care of them. So this book essentially is his like adventures with Ratan Tata, and like what all they kind of did together and stuff like that. I know that sounds weird, but I'm sure it's like sweet and nice. And yeah, I just want to read it because also I kind of knew of Shantanu Naidu from before, from like he has the NGO or the organization that he set up in Pune is called Motorpaws, and I had heard of it, and the good work that it did. And also Ratan Tata as a person just sounds like a very interesting human being, and this would be like a different side to him. So yeah, that book. Then we move on to a book by Salman Rushdie. I, for some reason, thought that this book also included some fiction writing, but it does not. But this book is called The Languages of Truth by Salman Rushdie, and this is insightful and inspiring essays, criticisms, and speeches that focus on his relationship with the written word. And I'm sure that it will be beautifully written and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, like I he's an interesting dude. So I and he writes really well. So I'm sure it'll be a good book. And I am curious to know what he has to say. Hence, I want to read this book. And then I have very similar thoughts about the next author, which is Shashi Tharoor. And the book that he is coming up with is Pride and Prejudice and Panditri, which is a collection of fiction and non-fiction essays. See, this is where I got confused. I basically got confused between Shashi Tharoor and Salman Rushdie and like flipped them. So Shashi Tharoor is writing a book which is a collection of fiction and non-fiction, and Salman Rushdie is just writing like non-fiction essays and criticisms and stuff. Cool. Let's move on to more essays about literature, and that is The Taste of Literature by Chandrahas Chaudhary. Now, I haven't read any of his books, though I have friends who have, and they have sort of opposing thoughts on his books. However, I did listen to him at JLF, like Jaipur Literature Festival, and I think that he asked some very interesting questions. I think that the way that he goes about his discussions are really nice, and I feel like he does understand literature just a bit. And especially, like, I really loved his session with Amy Tan. So I have hope. And this is apparently essay collection, which is where each essay is a few pages short and written in Chaudhary's erudite but accessible prose, covering matters from Hindu nationalism to questions of myth, history, and the realist novel. So yeah, so I'm intrigued, and I would like to read. The next book I am so intrigued to read. Like, it just sounds so interesting and like so cool. So it's called How Prime Ministers Decide by Neerja Chaudhary. And Neerja Chaudhary has done hundreds of interviews, including in interviewing some prime ministers to break down some of the most controversial decisions that like the highest levels of the government have kind of taken. And I just think that's so interesting. I want to understand what their decision making processes, and I guess through these various different interviews she would have understood it from like all different angles. And I just think that that's really cool, and I wonder what sort of decisions they're going to talk about, but it just sounds cool, right? The next one is called A Luxury Called Health, The Art, the Science, and the Trickery of Medicines by Kaveri Nambisan. And I'm going to just read out what it says because it just sounds so interesting. It says, an extraordinary doctor and writer draws up her experiences as a surgeon over 4 decades in rural and small town India, from Bihar and UP to Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, to show you how tragically and indeed criminally the country's health system and private medical practitioners have failed us. And I just think that is so interesting. Healthcare in India, I mean, healthcare in the world is spoken about a lot, but not so much in India. And I definitely want to understand a doctor's perspective as well, especially with regards to doctors who have worked in like rural and small town India. And yeah, I just think that this would be a very insightful read. And the next one also is very insightful, and that is Exiles of the New Frontier, Epics of the Homeless in India by Ashwin Parulkar. Um, and again, I will just read out the snippet summary thing because it does a better job. And that is a monumental book about homelessness in India, containing over 100 life histories of homeless men and women across in Delhi. It examines why and how people become homeless, how do they survive on the streets, and how some exit the state of homelessness but some never do. Ashwin Parulkar, who worked for almost a decade among the homeless, is an extraordinary storyteller as he is a scholar, and this book will be one of the best non-fiction books of India in recent years. Well, yes, color me impressed. I don't know if it will be one of the best non-fiction books in India, but this concept just sounds so interesting to me. We have all seen homeless people around us in whichever like state, country, I mean not country, but state, like city that we live in. And I genuinely do not know the answers to the questions that they have asked in this book. So I am very, very intrigued to read this, and just I think it will be, as I said, very insightful. The next is also a book that I think is going to be very interesting, and this is called The Women Who Shaped the Constitution of India by Angelica Aribam and Akash Satyavali. And this is, again, I will just read out what it says. But The 15 is a refreshing look at the making of the Indian Republic through profiles of 15 women who were part of the Constituent Assembly of India and active participants in drafting of the Constitution. Tracing the history of making India's Constitution, it provides remarkable insight into the lives of these women, throwing light on the influences that shaped them, the norms they defied, and the convictions that they stood for. And I didn't even know this was a thing. I was just like, I was living in the dark, and this summary brought me to the light. I was just like, wait, this happened. I didn't even think about it, and just it just sounds so interesting. I would love to read this book to like know who these 15 women are. It just sounds so cool, and like, wow. Ooh, and the next one is so cool. Okay, so the next one is called Spy Stories Inside the Secret Worlds of ISI and RAW by Adrian Leville and Kathy Scott Clark. And these are the authors that wrote another best-selling book called The Siege, which was based on the which was a book about the attack on Taj on that 26/11. And this is basically going to be a book about the ISI and RAW, which are the two like CBI, like I don't know, like FBI forces, like the secret agencies of India and Pakistan. And yeah, they are apparently rival agencies, obviously. And I would just this just sounds really cool. Like, Now, the next three books are books that technically already released in 2020, but they were only released in the online platforms and not through physical books because, 2020 being absolute rubbish. So it is going to be re-released in 2021, and they all just sound really cool and really interesting, so I thought that I would talk to you about them. And the first one is The Inheritance of Words by Mamang Dai, and these are all writings from Arunachal Pradesh. So Arunachal Pradesh is a state in the northeast. Of course, if you are Indian or generally are knowledgeable about geography, you would know this, but it is also a state that I have not read much of, and there's not too much literature that's kind of like come to me from there, so I'm very intrigued to read it. This is going to be an anthology of, as I said, women writing from Arunachal Pradesh, and they are going to be talking about the various subjects such as identity, home, belonging, language, shamanism, folk culture, orality, and more. And yeah, I just think that all of this just sounds really cool, and I look forward to reading it. The next one is a book on Kashmir, which is Resisting Disappearance, Military Occupation, and Women's Activism in Kashmir by Ether Zia. And this I think is also really interesting. So the authors has worked a lot with the APDP, which is the Association of Parents of Disappeared People, and as an anthropologist she wrote this book, which follows mothers and half widows, half widows are essentially people who, because their husbands have disappeared by various like forces, which are the security forces, army, police, whatever, border security, etc., and they can't prove that their husbands are dead, hence they are half widows. So It's about them as they step into courts, military camps, and morgues in search of their disappeared kin. Through an amalgam of ethnography, poetry, and photography, Zia illuminates how dynamics of gender and trauma in Kashmir have been transformed in the face of South Asia's longest running conflict, providing profound insight into how Kashmiri men and women nurture a politics of resistance while facing increasing military violence under India. So yeah, that just I again want to really be educated more about Kashmir and what's happening there. I think that this was spoken about like just last year, and it just kind of disappeared with like coronavirus and stuff like that. But I do feel like it is a thing that I still want to like educate myself more on. And I think that this book will definitely do that. So yeah. And then the last book is really cool, like it's so interesting, and it is partition literature, but it is called Inherited Memory: Third Generation Perspectives on Partition in the East. And this is essentially a book which follows, like, okay, so the concept behind this was that even though like partition, when you think of partition in India, you only think of like stories from like the Punjab side, but you don't really think too much of the stories from the Bengal side as much, because I don't know, there's just more, I guess, fiction, etc., coming from that side. And essentially what these people decided to do was to try to understand the thought process and of memories from that time. But of course, because so many people who had been there during the partition had already died, they decided to take another like look at things and like a different lens at looking at. And essentially what they decided to see was how the memory of partition was passed down to the next few generations. So they basically interviewed children and grandchildren of the people who moved during the partition, both in like Bengal and as well as in Bangladesh, and see what that was like. And I will read this part out to you. It says, guided by a committed and engaged group of writers from both countries, the book explores through the stories of ancestors, the memories passed down, carried by them, the things that they will never forget, the yearnings that did not go away, the journeys that remained unfinished, and those that were accomplished. Through these, it examines how history simultaneously looks so different and so similar from either side. And okay, I am like tearing up just reading that. It just sounds like a really important read. And I just think that it'll be um just interesting to hear different perspectives finally. And yeah, that was the end of my list of non-fiction reads. I do hope that this was helpful for you and that you liked at least some of these books that are going to come out in 2021. Do let me know what books you definitely want to read. And also yeah, happy new year. Like it's gonna come in a few hours, or like you're watching this in 2021, so like happy new year to you. This year's been insane, right? Anyway, again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good one. And anything else? No. Okay, bye.